Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first panel conversation of 2025. I simultaneously feel like January has already flown by, and I can't believe it's already 2025. I am Stephanie Lemick. I am the founder and CEO of the Wounded Workforce, and I am so grateful to be able to kick off our third year of having amazing guests join us to have really important conversations about mental health in the workplace and how we can build a more trauma-informed future of work. Today, we are so lucky to have another amazing group joining us. So I will go ahead and let each of our amazing panelists introduce themselves, and I will kick it over to Cassandra first. Cassandra, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Cassandra Babilia, and I'm the creator of Make Work Suck Less. I'm an employee experience and communications leader in tech.
Amazing. It is so great to have you. And I was joking before we jumped on. Cassandra, I slid into her DMs because I am such a big fan of hers to get her voice on this panel, to have her included. So I am so thrilled to have you join us today. Christy, welcome back.
Thanks. Glad to be here. Cassandra, great to meet you. It's the first time, and Greer as well. And Alex, so great to be here with such wonderful, amazing folks. I'm Christy Palutic. I'm a third generation construction professional, and I've worked in this industry for about 20 years, really on the people side, working with businesses and construction leaders to help them improve their employee experience. So Cassandra, I love that you're an EX passionate person as well, which is pretty fantastic. So be able to do that through Alta Consulting, working across the industry, supporting leaders. So glad to be here and part of the conversation.
Absolutely. Always lovely to have you be part of our panels, Christy. Alex.
Hello. I'm very happy to be back here with such a fantastic panel. So Alex Seiler, I'm the founder and chief people officer of Alex Seiler LLC, and also a startup advisor. I've been in the people and HR space for 20 years, which is, yikes, that went by quickly. And have worked in a myriad of different size companies and different industries as well. So really excited to be here with this group and on a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Great to have you back as well, and to help us ensure we keep this conversation spicy. I know I can always count on you for that, Alex. Greer.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Speaking of somebody who slid into DMs, that's why I'm here, because Stephanie was no exception to that. So again, I'm Greer Prosich. I am founder of the Performance Innovation Collective. So I focus a lot on performance management and free open strategies on really kind of lifting all of the boats with the tide when it comes to improving processes for people. And I'm also a disability advocate. So I'm somebody who really believes that inclusion and accessibility impact everybody positively. So starting that conversation and creating space is something really important. And I think this conversation fits really, really well into that. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So thrilled to have you here, Greer. And I'm so glad you slid into my DMs. So let's get into what we're here to talk about today. So our panel topic for this month is New Year, New Strategies, Cultivating Mental Wellness in the Workplace. And as we kick off this new year, many organizations are probably reevaluating their priorities. And one area that has rightfully taken center stage is and should be mental wellness. In today's workplace, supporting mental health is no longer just a nice to have. It's really a business imperative. Employees who feel supported and valued are not only healthier, but also are more engaged, productive, and innovative. Yet despite growing awareness, many organizations are still navigating how to create impactful, sustainable strategies that promote mental well-being. Today, we have a fantastic and diverse group of experts to bring their unique perspectives to this topic. And together, we're going to explore actionable ways organizations can foster mental wellness, overcome barriers, and create lasting cultural change. So let's go ahead and get started and do just that. To kick us off, I'll start with my question I always start with, and I would love to hear from each of you. Why is this topic important to you personally?
I'm happy to start. So maybe not as a surprise that it's important to me from both a personal and a professional standpoint. On a personal level, as an adult, I have struggled with mental health at times, particularly around depression and anxiety. And I really want to normalize those conversations. And I also think it's important as people leaders to be able to say that, because a lot of the employees that we're working with are dealing with those issues as well. I also have people in my family who went undiagnosed with things like depression, anxiety, and I feel like, if they got the help earlier, they could have lived an even happier life than they did. I also think that on a professional level, I've seen so many people go through workplace stress, and I'm really all about creating environments where people can thrive, both professionally and personally. So we all know that the workplace is where most adults spend the majority of their waking hours, making it a crucial setting for mental health support as well.
I love it. I'll jump in here as well. Alex, I think probably similar to you in some ways that topic like this, right, when it comes to mental wellness, isn't just about the day-to-day job what we get paid for, right? It's not about that. It's the personal passion, the impacts, right? Supporting those around me with the challenges that they've had, and that how do we positively impact the workplace? Because Alex, to your point, right, that's where we have as adults spending most of our waking hours. And we all know that if we can improve that experience for the folks that we're working with and create, a better place, then they're going to take that home and in turn positively impact their partners, their families, the communities within which they live in the day-to-day, right, outside of work as well. And so being able to shift that focus from, our really towards wellness and kind of bring some new ideas to the table, I think is important as we continue the work that we're doing.
I'd add on to that and just say, if you expect me to bring my whole self to work, you better make space for it. Like, don't come here and tell me that you want to do this survey and see how I'm doing and do this action plan and then figure out the strategies and then like not make the safe space that you're promising me. So I think if we're going to kind of walk the talk, we really have to put our money where our mouth is. And not only for the team members that I support, I want to be able to bring my whole self to work. So in a lot of ways, I'm doing the work that is going to make it safe for me too. So we have to remember that HR people, we need to prioritize our mental health as well. And I think that having the conversation and bringing visibility to it is the first place to start.
Can I just say snap to Greer for that too?
Yes, let's snap. So mental health in the workplace is important to me because I've seen both ends of when it works and when it doesn't work, when it's supportive and when it's not. So for those of you who don't know, before I was in tech, I spent 8 years at the CIA, and I did multiple war zone and extreme hardship tours that left me with undiagnosed and self-medicated PTSD. They actively discouraged us from seeking mental health support and threatened our clearances and thus our livelihoods. The culture was so toxic that it took me 5 years to drag myself out of extreme burnout, to more recently where I have been dealing with postpartum anxiety with both of my children and finding a way to return back to work in a sustainable way and being supported by my managers, my teams, my leadership, my organization through culture and policies and benefits that actually make that possible. So that's why this is why I'm nerdy out about burnout and workplace culture and well-being. So thanks for inviting us all in, Stephanie, to have this discussion today.
Absolutely fantastic. Such amazing answers. I love it when we have our first question and everyone has a great answer, because I was like, I was right. This is going to be amazing. So, we've been talking about mental wellness, mental health at work, mental well-being in the workplace for a few years now. When we think about, as we're kicking off 2025, as we're kicking off this year specifically, and what we're experiencing now, what we've just experienced as a workplace, as a culture, what we're anticipating in 2025, why is mental wellness such an essential focus for organizations this year?
I would start by saying because the world is on fire. Everything around us is on fire right now. And unfortunately, as much as we want to say that we don't want to bring politics and all of this stuff into work. It's part of our daily lives and it comes home with us. And so I think we have to be able to create environments for people to thrive, like Alex said. And so for me, that means 2025 is the year of boundaries. Mental health is a lot of what you offer people and what you share of yourself. And so taking charge of what you allow others to access of you is probably something that companies should start thinking about.
I'll jump in here. I just want to plus one to everything that Greer said. We also, not just the world is on fire, but the last few years, everything that has culminated between global challenges, technology accelerating, different workplace dynamics, it's just intensified mental health pressures. And I am really sick and tired of organizations thinking that mental wellness is just an HR issue. It's a business imperative because at the end of the day, it affects productivity, it affects retention, it impacts innovation. So, and something I'm really actually happy about in particular with the younger generation of workforce that's coming in now is they're prioritizing well-being in their career choices. They want work-life balance. And so I think companies are going to have to remain competitive in order to retain those individuals as well.
Yeah, Alex, to that point, I mean, the productivity is not possible. So the 2023 Stress in America report put out that, let's see, ages 18 to 34, 67% of adults were experiencing stress so bad, so completely overwhelming, they weren't able to focus at work. When 2/3 of your workforce is unable to focus, they're not going to be productive. And as Greer said, the world is on fire. I don't see that improving anytime soon in 2025. So we need to find a way to help people deal with the politics, the realities of the world, and manage through that stress.
Yes to all the things, right, that you all said. So there's a part of me just like ditto and leave it at that. But to add on, or really just to underscore a couple of things, Alex, you hit the nail on the head when we look at the youngest generation coming into the workplace. I happen to be a parent of two of them, so you're welcome, and I apologize for that. But you are so spot on that with this generation coming into the workforce, in addition to all the things that our current employees are working with, this generation that's flooding the workplace expects these conversations to exist, expect these resources to be available, and expect to be heard when they come to the table and say, hey, I'm struggling with X, Y, or Z, and I'm not sure how to navigate that. So if organizations aren't prepared for that part of welcoming in this generation, shame on them, because they're certainly not going to be able to keep them for any length of time unless they're ready to welcome this aspect of this generation into the workforce.
And can I just add on to that, Stephanie, is that it became even more abundantly clear in my last in-house role, because I remember somebody saying to me, I see how much partners work, the number of hours, and I don't aspire to work those kind of hours. So if that means I don't make as much money, but I have better health and wellness in my life, then I'm all about that. And I think it just underscores the point that Christy just made as well.
100%. 100%. I could talk about Gen Z all day. I love Gen Z. Do they love me? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. I don't know. Or don't. So, one thing I think that comes up a lot is the role that organizational leaders and managers play when it comes to mental health and well-being. And there's all sorts of information and statistics that's pretty eye-opening when it comes to the overall impact. But, we talked at the beginning, we want to have, some actionable insights for folks who are listening in. So, in your opinion, in your experience, what role do organizational leaders and managers play in shaping a mentally healthy workplace culture? And what are some action items that, managers or leaders listening in might be able to integrate into how they manage their teams, how they run at?
Can I Can I jump in with some employee experience math? Y'all have heard about girl
Please.
math and boy math. I want to talk about EX.
Yes.
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 I I have been joking with people that executives will do anything to solve burnout except literally reducing workloads. So we talk about burnout. So burnout is in the workforce syndrome that is characterized by exhaustion, cynicism, and feelings of failure. The biggest bucket by far is the exhaustion, and the biggest contributor to the exhaustion bucket is an unsustainable workload and unreinforced boundaries. So employee experience math. Let's say you start with year one, you start with 10 team members and you expect 10 units of output. All right. At the end of year one, you manage out the lowest 10% and you increase your goals by 10% arbitrarily, like we do every single year. By the way, you don't backfill that one role. So now you have 9 humans expected to do 11 units of output. The end of year two, you manage out again the lowest 10% and you increase your expected output again by 10%. Oh, and by the way, one of your top talent leaves because they are seeking better work-life balance elsewhere. You now have 7 humans expected to do 12 units of output. Over the course of year 3, 2 solid performers go down into the least effective PIP territory bucket because they are burned out by picking up the work of their peers who have left or who have been managed out. You have another person who takes a leave of absence, and the manager on the team is considering moving to a different part of the organization where there's more stability. So now you've got 4 humans expected to do 13 units of output because, of course, you increased your goals again arbitrarily that year. The team collapses and it's absorbed into a sister team where the skills are kind of but not really aligned, and therefore those 4 individuals are likely going to fail in that organization in the long term. And then leadership laments that just no one wants to hustle anymore. Please make it make sense. The math does not math. Leaders are driving this vicious cycle when they don't stop to consider, are we doing the right things? Are we trying to do too much? The answer is yes. You are trying to do too much. Do we have the right people to achieve these things? And are we equipping them with everything they need to make that happen within the bounds of a normal workload? So whether that evens out to about 40 hours a week, which it should, like that's what you should be considering, because a workload that requires someone to work 80 to 100 hours a week over the long term is not sustainable. That leads to the burnout. That leads to 2/3 of your workforce too stressed and overwhelmed to function.
I love that. And I just kind of want to piggyback off of it and say, I think really what it boils down to a lot of times is clear expectations for success, right? So what I hear from you is those people did not have clear expectations of what success looked like, and their role kept growing and growing and growing. And to me, that sounds like there's probably a misalignment between them and their manager on what success looks like. And probably skewed even more than that is what success looks like to the manager, because everything comes from the top. We can't fight that, right? Everything comes from the top. And at the end of the day, what is rewarded and recognized, what's reinforced, those are the behaviors and the actions that people are going to emulate. And so when you see leadership at the top burning out, working all of this extra time, doing the busy work just to be busy, that's what success looks like to other people. So no matter what we say or do, no matter the systems we put into place, if we're not reinforcing and rewarding the correct behaviors, it kind of doesn't matter what we do. So I think the big problem with mental health at work is we're really not addressing the systemic problems. We're putting the Band-Aid over it and we're saying, hey, okay, this will just help solve it, and not really thinking of the long-term outcomes.
Greer, you're getting me thinking. Oh, Christy, were you going to go first?
No, jump on in, my friend. Go ahead.
So the word that comes to mind right now is vulnerability, something that many managers can tend to struggle with. And it's the missing piece to the pie a lot of the time. So, sharing their own mental health experience can break down the stigma. Also thinking about allocating resources. How can they champion internal wellness initiatives? How can they create psychologically safe environments? And for me now, I've started saying psychologically safe environments where people can feel uncomfortable together and talk about the hard things, including mental health. And, Greer touched on it too, modeling those right behaviors of what healthy work-life boundaries and self-care practices look like. Because if you're sending emails at 2 a.m., people are going to think that that is okay. And that is the kind of environment that they need to be, that is the kind of effort that they need to be putting into their job and the sort of hours they need to be working. I also don't want to lose sight, Stephanie, of, I know you mentioned any particular strategies. And I know that in the past, whenever I had to put together a mental health strategy, I also wanted to make sure that I wasn't throwing spaghetti in against a wall and make sure that it was a few things that were like quality efforts. It's not about the quantity game. So a couple of things I would just think that can be easy wins are like having wellness check-ins, during team meetings, creating some sort of peer support network, an obvious one, no meeting days, so people can have a little bit of, room to reduce digital fatigue. I mean, all these things can help. And they are so low cost and they're way easier to implement than people realize. I just don't think people spend the time to think about how much that will help their employees.
I have to jump in. I just have to jump in. You got me really going at this point right now because
I think it's the coffee I had today, to be honest.
I know, I'm sure, because I had a lot of coffee too. But you're really making me think that we have to be really considerate about how we're pulling things together. We have to be really thoughtful about what are we doing in terms of rewards and recognition. And so we have a lot of conversations around motivation and all of these things in the workplace. I would kind of break the mold as an IO psychologist and say, I really think people are only motivated by two things, something that's going to reward them and something that's kind of negative for them, right? And so I'm a believer of, if we care about wellness and if we care about mental health and all of these things, and we're going to ask people, how are you doing? How are you feeling in the workplace? Do you feel safe with your manager? Tie those things to compensation. That's what people care about, right? If we're going to put metrics in place that matter and we're going to measure wellness, tie it to their bonus, tie it to their performance review. Let's really use the data and reinforce what we want, because again, we're just arbitrarily measuring a lot of things and not using the data in the right way.
I love that. And I think that there's, as we think about what strategies we can implement in organizations, there's, that organizational layer, right? Whether we're going to, like, as a company, we're going to have a no meeting Friday, right? Or a no meeting day, which I love, or we're going to tie compensation, or here's what we're going to do. They can also set those negative examples as well. But, to get from here down to your individual contributors, it's this banding here of these managers, leaders, supervisors, call them what you will, that have the single biggest impact on the experience of those employees. So regardless of what this senior executive leadership level is saying, doing, implementing, right, which hopefully they're setting good examples, it's really those leaders across here that need to do two things. One, held accountable to do the positive things that those senior leaders are talking about, and to be vulnerable, right? As well, Alex, to use your words, right? Even if they're not sure how to respond in a moment, if someone's coming to them, even something simple as say is like, I've never dealt with that before. Help me understand, right? Or tell me more. To sit in that uncomfortable space, no one loves it. No one does, right? But to be able to sit in that space with someone as well. But it's really that layer there in the middle that has the single biggest impact on the experience of the employees that they've got working for them, whether that's flowing the positive things down, pushing back against some of the negative things, what have you. It's really that filter right there.
Yeah, you don't need to be a therapist as a frontline manager to be able to say, hey, how is everything going with you? How is everything going with your family? How can I support you best today? What do you need? That's it.
100%. And then the pause to wait for the answer.
Yeah.
Right.
And also people aren't looking for the manager to solve the problem. They just want to be heard. Right. Mm-hmm. That goes so much further than people realize. And if they can do that, that particular manager and team might do better in that dirty word that Greer talked about earlier, surveys. But it does. And Christy, to your point, like, if something isn't happening at the top, it doesn't mean you can't do something at a grassroots level that's going to impact what's happening in that team. Now, do I think that's going to be scalable and the right way to approach it? No, but it doesn't mean you don't do nothing, right?
Yeah, you can't just sit back as a supervisor or manager and say, oh, well, the leadership isn't, doesn't have a thing. I call bullshit, right? Like you've got a certain span of control, use it, right? Do the things that you know it can do.
I love that mentality, but I also, from a learning and development perspective, think people don't know things until they're told. And so if somebody has never had a manager who has asked them these questions or made the space for them, they don't know any better. And frankly, I think we see a lot of times people get promoted or they get put into a role and they don't have the competence to be a successful leader. And so kind of to answer your earlier question, Stephanie, I think that organizations need to be better at equipping managers to be able to feel like this space is even appropriate to have at work, because so many people have never had the space themselves that they don't even know what that feels like to have something to model that after with their own employees.
100%. 100%. I love that.
And I think that, to your point, that's where things like mental health first aid and championing wellness initiatives, actually showing up and seeing your manager is there alongside you, like those things go a long way as well.
So I'm a messy moderator, and that I'm supposed to moderate these conversations, but I can't help but put my 2 cents in. You know how that is. You all know by now. And there's I think of just a few things I always offer as really easy recommendations for managers who are like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this. I just heard a new one. And when you mentioned, Alex, people want to be heard. So one that I heard recently at a conference was asking people, do you want to be helped? Do you want to be heard? Or do you want to be hugged? Like, what are you looking for? Please ask for consent before you give people hugs at work. But that's so helpful. Like, ask people what they want, and that'll help you understand how to show up for them. Another one, this is so simple, but it is a game changer. Trust me. You can schedule your emails. Like, if you are a manager and you are catching up on emails, it is okay. I get it. I've been there. Schedule them so they're not getting delivered at 9:00 at night. They're not getting delivered on Sunday afternoon, because we know people have their emails on their phones and they're checking them. We can't help ourselves. And last, but certainly not least, this is my favorite way to be more trauma informed. Give your employees a choice. Find a way to create choice in any moment. And it doesn't mean giving folks carte blanche. It means, can you create an either or? Can you create a choice in priorities? Can you create a choice in the how of something's done? Because that is directly connected to empowerment and ownership of your work, which is connected to overall mental health. Those 3 things don't cost a dime and absolutely are things that you can implement tomorrow or today. Be aggressive. Implement them today. You have time left in the day. Go for it.
I love that. And Stephanie, that first one, do you want to be helped, heard, helped, or hugged is, I think, the 3 that you use. I didn't use the hug one. I literally had this conversation with my 17-year-old son yesterday. He was home, we were eating dinner, and he was complaining about his manager being unresponsive and just not listening to him, whatever, right? And I'm a problem solver. And so my inside, okay, I've got strategies, right? I would do this or this. But I took that moment and be like, oh, that sounds really frustrating. Do you want to talk through potential solutions, or do you just want to vent a little bit? He's like, yeah, I just want to vent, because here's what I'm thinking I'm going to do. Okay, great. I think that sounds awesome, right? And he's like, okay, cool. Feels heard, has a plan, off he goes. It just takes a minute to, and I got to check myself, right, as a problem solver. But yes, I love it.
And Stephanie, sorry. Cassandra, do you want to go first?
I was just going to say to Christy, I mean, you're talking about a conversation with your son. Stephanie, when you were talking about the 3rd, giving your employees a choice, I was thinking, oh, yes, like I do my toddler when I want him to eat his dinner. Do you want mommy to help you eat, or do you want to do it like a big boy by yourself?
100%.
And Stephanie, I was saying schedule to send has become my new best friend. I'm not being good at it in the past. And I did it for the new, was that person working on some emails right before the new year, but I made sure they didn't go out until, and I was like, oh, I've got to do this more. So I totally agree with you. Also, now I can't get the visual of like prior managers giving me hugs and how I would have felt about that as well.
That's why I said ask for consent. Ask for consent. We don't touch people without consent. But you know what I mean? Just like the comfort. You just want some comfort.
Well, and also, but going back to like just that idea of psychological safety and being uncomfortable, I'm imagining how easy it would have been for some managers and how completely uncomfortable if they would have given me a hug there too. You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Actually,
and if you're not a hugger, don't offer. It's fine.
Stephanie, your schedule to send. So Alex, you taking the initiative to take that on and implement that is great, but that's as an individual solution, right? I actually think to expand on the schedule to send and a organization-wide free go do today thing is to actually document your communication norms. Call it a policy if you want, but it should cover like how and when you communicate as a team. What channels do you use for what type of messages? When is it appropriate to communicate? So if you're on a team that everybody's on the same time zone, you could say, we do not ping each other outside of working hours. We don't ping each other on nights and weekends. If you're on a global team where there are multiple time zones to consider, you could document, we expect a response within 1 to 2 business days, but you can respond during your working hours. Clearly state expectations around not working, including checking or reading email while on vacation, documenting what it means to be on call and who can be on call and what kind of compensation, whether that's money or time, you can expect if you are called in after hours. Like communication norms is such a huge part of the boundary setting. And again, it's a free thing. You can implement a communication norm policy today for free.
I love that so much. And on the topic of documentation, I have to call out our favorite documenter, Kim Minnick. She is the single source of truth queen. And I've learned so much from her in terms of just understanding the importance of having things written down, especially in such a remote, distributed world. And so I think, for a lot of reasons, we can see why people don't take PTO is because they're unsure of their unlimited policy and what does success here look like and what's too much or too little. So for me, what I have found that people really want is they want autonomy, but they want autonomy within guardrails. So they want that to say, here's where you have the ownership. Here's the bounds of where that ownership exists. Go beyond your way. And so I think we have to be conscious that we're actually setting a lot of people up to fail by saying, okay, go figure out how to interpret that policy on your own. Because what we're seeing in a lot of ways is people are just not using it or not doing it or not asking because they don't feel safe doing it. So we have to be intentional. And I think, like Cassandra was saying, how we're communicating, how we're getting this information across. So I'm a big believer in put it in onboarding. If it's important enough, you should communicate it in the first 90 days. Hey, communicate in the first 3 days if it's important enough. And so set the tone of what you really expect people to behave, how you want them to behave, and how the culture comes into play in communication and things like that.
I love that. And I like my messy moderator again, because whether you're communicating it deliberately or not, you are communicating it in that onboarding experience. And are you going to leave it up to something that's written and documented, or are you going to leave it up to the chance or whoever is part of that initial 90 days? Because I'm going to get on one. I used to get really frustrated with people, especially at the beginning of the pandemic when they said people don't know how to communicate. Like communication is so bad outside of the office, these different things. And I'm like, we have more than one office location. Like, what are you guys talking about? It's like, oh, you can't walk around and just talk to people? Well, that wasn't deliberate communication anyway. We weren't doing a good job communicating anyway. The fact that we weren't is just now kind of slapping you in the face. And I think, that is a lesson regardless of where you're doing work right now, whether it's remote, hybrid, full-time, in person. A huge lesson we should all be taking away is getting really deliberate with communication, how we do it, what those norms, processes are, because we actually kind of sucked at it before collectively. I really believe that.
Well, and how refreshing would it be if onboardings now that we actually talked about, or company talked about how they're combating burnout by putting protocols together, like we've put thought into this, right? And then that kind of message spreads like wildfire. More people want to work at organizations like that. Yeah. So it for a lot of people, that seems like so much and so hard to do, yet when you get down to brass tacks, it's not a lot of time. You spend more time talking about it than you do implementing it. You know?
Well, I think we don't do a very good job of collaborating with a lot of people. Like, to your point, onboarding starts before somebody comes onto a company, right? Your first interaction with somebody, even if it's your recruiter interaction, that's considered onboarding. And you have the opportunity then to explain your policies on burnout and the things that you're combating, just like you're saying, Alex. So I think, yeah, there's a multifaceted employer branding approach to being able to say, hey, we're taking burnout seriously. Here's how we're tracking it. Here's the ROI. Here's all of these things, because I want to go work at a place that cares about it enough to quantify it and to communicate it out. So yeah, we could be much smarter about how we're using data that we have too, that's readily available to us to help tell the story better and things like that. But I think HR has a lot of progress to make in that kind of department.
Absolutely. And I think in addition to, documenting or formalizing, making those explicit norms, right, in terms of whether it's communication, how you can handle it, that sort of deal, here's our culture. The other thing we need to be really mindful of, and organizations need to be mindful of, is what does this mean around promotional or growth opportunity? I was talking to a colleague of mine that primarily works remote and works for a large multinational company, but was told, like, what, if you want to go somewhere in this company, you better be in the office at least once a week, right? So company policy, what's written down says one thing, but then there's those implicit norms, right, that lead people with, oh gosh, am I doing the right things or not? So bringing it back on the mental wellness side, right? What anxieties, uncertainties is that leaving, when you've got it documented, you've got to make sure that you follow it up so that the implicit becomes explicit in terms of what are those norms and expectations throughout the organization.
I love that. This is so great. I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about something. We have lots of great conversations about mental health as part of these panels. And one thing I want to spend a little bit of time doing and do a better job highlighting this year is talking about the stigma that's often associated with talking about mental health, mental wellness, mental well-being, the fact that we all have challenges sometimes. And there are organizations, there are people like all of you who are much better at having these conversations than others. But the truth of the matter is there is still a significant stigma out there. And this can be especially prominent when we look at, certain industries or companies where, toughness or masculine energy, I know I did it, is prioritized. So how can leaders, managers, organizations address stigma around mental health and work to overcome it?
I'm going to jump in here. Working primarily in the construction industry, right? You just typified in lots of different ways, and it is riddled with stigma, right, around talking about mental health. I think there's two things that can really help. One, I think that there needs to, while the conversation around mental health and mental wellness is permeating the country, the industry, right, our vernacular, there is a lack of consistency around what wording is used and how it's used. Because mental health does not mean mental wellness, right? And does not mean mental illness or mental challenge or what have you, right? So I think that there needs to be some consistency around language and some formalization of that so that we're talking the same thing. The other thing is it's being vulnerable, right? Circling back to that, Alex, you brought it up initially, it's sharing the stories, it's creating that space and starting to see leaders within that start to bring up, hey, these are the challenges I'm navigating that I don't necessarily talk about in the day-to-day, and how to be like, oh, if you're going through that, maybe that's what I'm struggling with too. Maybe that's going to be more okay because, you bring that affinity bias to the table in a good way by creating space to break down those stigmas and have those conversations. So those two things, language and being vulnerable.
I agree with everything that Christy said, and I particularly around also language, I think probably makes a huge amount of difference in tougher industries, so to speak. So I think part of it is also doing a bit of a reframe that mental health support is really a strength that enhances performance and decision making, right? So use and maybe language that resonates with a particular industry, and maybe that is psychological safety, whether that is mental fitness. I think somebody that works in a particular industry knows what will resonate. Also, if there's any stories of people in that industry who are respected, who prioritize mental health, use that to kind of highlight why it's a business imperative as well, and how basically focusing on it improves things like safety and team performance and quality of output. I think if you can share some of those messages, maybe it might land. Not definitely, but maybe it will land more with some of those folks.
I think part of creating a safer environment and removing the stigma is giving people, like we're saying, a common language to use. And so there's not a lot of ways that people can talk about their capacity or how much they can exert or how much they have the energy to do. So for me, what I like to do is I like to talk to my boss in terms of spoon theory. So there's some really easy ways that you can make this common language really tangible. So for those who don't know what spoon theory is, it's really a way of quantifying your capacity. So for somebody who, is dealing with something, maybe they don't have an infinite amount of spoons. And so they can use that as a way to communicate with their manager. Hey, I've only got 4 spoons today. Can you please help me prioritize the 4 most important things that I can get done today, right? Or as a manager, you can check in with them and say, hey, how are you doing? How many spoons do you have? It's something that I have absolutely used with past managers and has gotten to a point where it's a very normal way how we communicate what I need. And so I think a lot of times we don't know how to communicate where we're at. And so being able to have that common language, even if it isn't spoon theory, it could be something else, but you and your leader need to be on the same page and talking in the same way. So if you can establish something that brings you all together, it's a really good place to start. And again, it's free.
I think another way to help destigmatize mental wellness in the workplace is going back to the communication and the definition, Christy. So about language and communication. So making it clear, spelling out in your policies, for example, your PTO, your leave policies. Employees may take PTO for mental health reasons. You can take a mental health day. Like that is an acceptable reason to take a day off. You don't need to tell your manager why or what the reason is, but that's a great use case. Or having a manager who talks about the fact that that leave of absence is an option available to everyone, to every employee if they need it. Here are the use cases they've seen. Here's how they could help you navigate, going through a short-term disability or long-term disability or leave of absence. But communicating that this is an option available to you and not making it something that someone has to hunt and peck for. Am I allowed to do this? Does my company support me? Just make it a part of this is another benefit that we offer, just like health insurance. We also offer short-term disability.
I love it. This is great. Like, once again, I'm like, I wish we had like 2 more hours to keep having this conversation because it's so good. And like, this is like, I can't believe I like pulled together such a perfect lineup for our first panel of the year. This is amazing. Thank you all so much. Because obviously there is so much more we could cover. I would love to leave our audience with some recommendations from you all. If folks are interested in learning more, if you have a book, an article, a podcast, anything else that you would recommend for further learning or more ideas. And Greer, I will kick it to you first.
I'll reiterate what I said. Spoon theory. It's a really, really, readily available. Go Google spoon theory. There's an article on Healthline that I reference quite often called I'm a Spoonie. And it really just gives some explanation about it. And so when I've started jobs in the past, I send it out to my team. I send it out to my managers and I say, hey, this is a way that I communicate. So for me, I would recommend establishing a way that you can talk about your needs, about your boundaries, establishing your boundaries, and then being able to stick to that through accountability or whatever that looks like. That's my biggest recommendation. Identify your boundaries and ways to stick to them.
I love it. Perfect. Thank you. Alex.
I had a feeling you were coming to me next. So I'm a fan of a podcast. So if you have come across the workplace mental health podcast by Mindshare Partners, I really like that because they give a lot of ongoing insights. And the other one I like that I actually, because as I knew I was coming on here, I was like, let me do a little research. And I saw that the World Economic Forum actually has a mental health in the workplace report. And it's got some really interesting best practices and data as well that I think is worth checking out. And then, I would just say, I agree with Greer's point that she just made. So I'll double down on that. And the other thing I would just say is give yourself grace. The word I use on a day-to-day basis is grace, grace, and grace, because we put so much on ourselves. And I, particularly as somebody who can be very self-critical, need to take a step back and really evaluate, am I happy with what I've done? Have I done all I could in a day? And if the answer is yes, then I can sleep soundly versus trying to put more pressure on myself. And then just getting angry that I feel like I didn't do enough. So we can be our own worst enemy, but let's start being our best friends instead.
I love it. Thank you. Christy.
So I'm going to go for a shameless plug. Because it's funny, Alex preparing for this podcast, like knowing I was coming on, I was like, okay, depending on how the conversation goes, like here's a good resource, right? Like as I think about it. But I'm going shameless plug time. I think because our conversation around stigma in some industries, and that sometimes it's really tough for some classes. Alex, I've been a certified mental health first aid trainer before, and I think that program is phenomenal. And yet that program doesn't resonate with certain companies in certain industries. And so my absolute shameless plug, Stephanie, is the Wounded Workforce's Building Resilience certification. It's a half-day workshop targeted for construction and the construction industry. And because when it comes to language, right, and stigma in this industry, it's just such a targeted need, looking at mental health and substance abuse and suicide prevention, and ultimately how do you build resilience to become capable to handle some of those situations. So what a great need to serve a very needed market, right, if you will. So shameless plug for today.
Well, thank you, Christy. Cassandra, wrap us up.
Sure. So I'm going to take us back to burnout. There's a bevy of resources out there, one of which is the Health and Human Services Surgeon General's report on workplace mental health and well-being, Maslach's burnout inventory. If you don't want to dig through those things, head over to Make Work Suck Less on LinkedIn and check out my burnout off-ramp series. It breaks down what burnout is and what it isn't, the main impacts that burnout has on us in the workplace, the 6 drivers that burnout, that how your job is driving burnout, and then a way for you to support yourself as needed to exit off and get the help you need. There's also, I wrote a burnout journal called You Got This. That's to help yourself personally. So there's from an organizational perspective, understand the burnout roadmap. And then for a personal perspective, check out You Got This.
And I have checked out You Got This, and it is awesome. And it is something I've used and I have gifted. So I also recommend that as well. Absolutely. You all, thank you so very much for joining us. This was such a phenomenal conversation. I'm so grateful for each of our panelists for joining us today. I am so grateful for our audience for joining us and listening in. Make sure and join us. We will have another fantastic panel coming to you in February. And until next time, be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, y'all.